like to introduce our first panelist, which is Undersecretary Pamela Patton. Undersecretary Patton is the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict. Undersecretary General Patton, a barrister by training, was appointed to this position in April 2017, and before that, from 2003 until 2017, she was a member of CEDAW, the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Ms. Patton's also been a member of several high-level panels and projects, all aimed at elevating women throughout the world. So there is likely no one better qualified to report and discuss the current status of women in society than Undersecretary General Patton.
Thank you for the introduction. Good evening, all. I would really like to start by expressing my sincere gratitude to the organizers for the invitation, and I commend the initiative, which is indeed very timely, because there is a sense of urgency. There is a sense of urgency and the need for all of us to unite in an effort to promote, protect, and fulfill women's rights. I wish this evening we could just celebrate gender equality and women's empowerment. After all, that was our expectation 25 years ago. I was in Beijing in 1995, and I recall how spirits soared as the global women's movement united with 189 member states to adopt the Beijing Platform for Action, the most progressive blueprint ever for advancing women's rights. The Beijing process unleashed remarkable political will and worldwide visibility. And since 1995, governments, civil society, and other stakeholders have translated the Platform for Action's promises into concrete changes in individual countries, with progress noted in all 12 areas of concern. Unfortunately, a quarter of a century since the Fourth World Conference in Beijing, we sadly note that no country has achieved gender equality for women and girls, and significant levels of inequality between women and men persist. We note that despite considerable achievements in advancing women's rights, across the globe, overall progress towards an equal and just society has been unacceptably slow and uneven. Marginalized groups of women remain left behind, while conflict and natural disasters have created new populations of women in situations of vulnerability. Discrimination against women and impunity for the violations of women's rights persist in both the private and public spheres, in times of conflict as in times of peace, and in all regions of the world. We also observe how gender gaps are deeper than we thought, and how the path to gender equality has become steeper because of backlash. Yes, we are in a global context of persistent discrimination and backlashes against women's rights, with a rise of movements opposing the universality of women's rights. There is an unprecedented pushback, often in the name of culture, religion, and tradition, which has been progressing across regions by an alliance of conservative political ideologies and religious fundamentalism. As a result, today we are in a situation where women's hard-fought achievements risk being reversed. I'm confident that during the panel discussion, we'll have the opportunity of discussing more about the status of women. I've been asked to bring the focus on my mandate. When it comes to my mandate as Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict, although significant normative advances have been made in the global agenda on women, peace, and security, we face an increasingly complex global security environment in which sexual violence remains a cruel tactic of war, torture, terror, and political repression, and a brutally effective tool of displacement and dehumanization. Conflict-related sexual violence has been the world's least reported and least condemned crime. It has been shrouded in a conspiracy of silence that shields the perpetrators and isolates the victims. My mandate as Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict was established in 2009 through the adoption of Security Council Resolution 1888. My role is to provide coherent and strategic leadership to engage in advocacy efforts with governments, all parties to conflict, state and non-state actors, and also civil society. In terms of my implementing arms, I chair UN Action Against Sexual Violence in Conflict, which is an interagency coordination network comprising of 15 UN agencies and entities, and my role is to ensure system-wide coordination on prevention and response to conflict-related sexual violence. And UN Action Network represents a concerted effort by the UN to work as one in terms of amplifying advocacy, improving accountability, and supporting country efforts to prevent sexual violence and respond effectively to the needs of survivors. Another implementing arm of my office is the team of experts on the rule of law and sexual violence in conflict, also established under Resolution 1888 and tasked with building national capacity to enhance accountability for sexual violence. Resolution 1888 built on the foundation laid by Resolution 1820, adopted a year earlier, which recognized conflict-related sexual violence as a threat to international peace and security. And this new approach affirmed that there could be no security without women's security. For the first time, war was being seen through the eyes of women and girls whose bodies have been part of the battlefield. When I took office in 2017, I articulated 3 strategic priorities for the mandate, namely prevention, by converting cultures of impunity into cultures of deterrence through justice and accountability. Secondly, fostering national ownership and leadership for a sustainable survivor-centered approach, because for me, the mandate has the face of a survivor. And thirdly, the need to address the root cause of sexual violence with gender inequality, discrimination, marginalization, poverty, exclusion as its invisible driver in times of war and peace. The mandate, which is only 10 years old, has achieved a lot in terms of ushering in a dramatic shift in paradigm and perspective. It brought a new consciousness and a new consensus that conflict-related sexual violence is a threat to international peace and security. What had long been dismissed as inevitable is now understood as preventable. What had once been deemed collateral or cultural is today condemned as criminal. The understanding that sexual violence is often commanded, committed, or condoned as a means of pursuing the military and ideological aims of armed groups has generated new strategic approaches to fighting back. It has prompted political as well as humanitarian solutions. Subsequent resolutions of the Security Council have added tools to our toolkit. For example, it has authorized specific monitoring analysis and reporting arrangements at country level as part of a system to deepen the evidence base for action and to increase the pressure on parties to comply with international norms by listing or naming and shaming those credibly suspected of abuses. With regard to our operational impact, the United System is today reaching and supporting thousands of survivors who had once been invisible and inaccessible. Peacekeepers are now systematically trained to detect, deter, and respond to sexual violence as part of their operational readiness standards. Sexual violence offenses have become an integral part of international investigations. Standalone designation criteria on sexual violence have been included in the sanctions regime of numerous countries. The two operational arms of my mandate, the Team of Experts and UN Action Network, are supporting survivors through concrete projects in several countries. My operational methodology is to secure commitments with national authorities in affected countries to prevent and address sexual violence, and to anchor these commitments at the highest level through concrete implementation plans and strategies. And to date, my office has signed joint communiqué with Côte d'Ivoire, the DRC, Guinea, Somalia, South Sudan, the Central African Republic, Iraq, Mali, and Myanmar. But what is the reality on the ground, you must be asking yourself. Indeed, measuring the magnitude of sexual violence in conflict and fragile settings is fraught with methodological challenges and ethical concerns. Due to underreporting, figures obtained are estimates at best. In towns and villages where war has broken out and law has broken down, sexual violence remains a cruel tactic of torture, terror, and political repression. The response continues to be painfully slow. Impunity remains the rule, and justice the rare exception. My field mission over the past years have also consistently revealed major gaps in services and resources, which make it difficult for victims to move forward as survivors. In Iraq, I met Yazidi women and girls who had received neither medical nor psychosocial support several months after their release from ISIL captivity and sexual enslavement. In the DRC, I met women and girls afflicted by the double tragedy of rape and rejection, with no access to credit or economic opportunity after being abandoned by their husbands and cast out of their homes. My visits to South Sudan, Mali, and the Central African Republic were another chilling reminder of the countless rape victims who remain invisible and marginalized due to collapsed institutions and a climate of insecurity in remote regions controlled by armed groups. In the villages I visited, survivors were forced to walk for several days to reach even the most basic healthcare facility. This is despite the fact that when it comes to post-rape care, distance can be a death sentence. Survivors are not a homogeneous group. They include male victims, indigenous women, rural women living in remote areas, widows, female heads of household, women's human rights defenders, journalists reporting on these crimes, children born of wartime rape who are often shunned as bad blood or children of the enemy, and members of the LGBTI communities, amongst others. I keep bringing these new dimensions to light to ensure that no one is left behind or excluded from the dividends of peace and development, which is also the commitment at the heart of the SDGs. If civilians continue to suffer sexual violence in situations of armed conflict, it is not for lack of international norms and institutions to protect them. It is because existing norms are inadequately implemented and enforced. As we navigate the long and winding road from rhetoric to reality, the plight and rights of survivors remain my moral compass. Since my first day in office, I have emphasized the importance of a survivor-centered approach and made it a strategic priority of my mandate. A survivor-centered approach is one that gives voice and choice to the survivor, restores their agency, and builds their resilience. At this critical juncture, we cannot lose focus. We must keep the searchlight of international scrutiny on this historically hidden crime. When I think of what is at stake, I think of all the survivors I have met in the DRC, Mali, Central African Republic, Somalia, South Sudan, Darfur, Nigeria, Guinea, Iraq, Myanmar, Cox's Bazar. I think of the thousands of women and girls who remain in the captivity of groups like ISIL and Boko Haram. If the Security Council resolutions on sexual violence tell us one thing, it is that wartime rape is preventable and not inevitable. Addressing it is our collective responsibility. The survivors are watching and waiting, and we cannot fail them. Thank you.